Ija, who spoke about the issue amongst black elders across all industries and walks of life not passing the baton to the younger generation, which has led to stagnation of growth and the discouragement and resentment amongst the younger generation. Have you witnessed this?
I have. The black community suffers from a lack of intergenerational transfer of power. And in order to understand why the black community struggles from this lack of intergenerational transfer of power, you have to understand the castration of the black male's ego by the white power structure. This also speaks to the earlier conversation on sports and athletics as well. It's one of the only vehicles where you can challenge a white person without them feeling threatened and being motivated by a need to seek revenge against you. You know, if you dunk on a white guy on the court, it's okay. If you tackle a white guy on a football field, it's okay. So only through sports is black aggression, if you would, unbridled masculinity is actually celebrated. It's the only place where it's celebrated where it is not feared or punished. So when we come over to the sphere of black leadership, you have that same type of situation where if I'm not used to having power, if I'm not used to tasting power and having authority, when I get some, I never want to share it. We have to realize that most black men have suffered from some form of psychological castration at the hands of the white power structure. We are not allowed to maximize our God-given intellectual talents. As a result of that, when we come into the black community and we become preachers or leaders, we can get so intoxicated with that authority that we never want to share it or pass it down. That's why you see so many black elders in leadership positions. Not to say that we should ever throw our elders away. As the quote goes, we need elders for wisdom, young men for war. So you don't toss the elders aside. We continue to drink from their wisdom as the black men go out into war. We need the elders to coach us through that battle. So they are never to be discarded. But in our community, we have a situation where the elders are still the leaders. 80 years old, I'm the newly elected president. 75 years old, I'm the newly elected president. 90 years old, I'm still the face of my organization. Why hasn't this been passed down yet? Elders are not interested in going to jail. They're not interested in being martyrs. They no longer attract the energy and the attention of the youth. So why does the black community have so many elders? Because black men are drunk on power. It is a problem that we have had for at least the last 60 or 70 years. Why do you have a million churches? It's not because everybody's in love with Jesus. Why do you have a million masjids? It's not because everybody's in love with Muhammad. The problem is when that 25-year-old pastor comes back to the church after seminary, he's ready to get a couple sermons on Sunday. But the senior pastor, who's 60, 70 years old, no, young man, wait your turn. But you can't let me do one, just one? No, this is my church. I built this church. My grandfather gave me this church. His grandfather gave me this church. The same thing with our community-based organizations. So the young man gets tired of waiting. He leaves, starts his own church. And here's the irony and the paradox. When he gets to be 60, he's going to do exactly to the next young man what his pastor did to him. This is why we have old people running all the civil rights organizations, old people running most of the religious organizations in our community. We do not believe in training the youth because we don't want to be surpassed by the youth.
And there's another aspect to it we need to touch on is the fact that the sharing of information. It's like people purposely withhold information for the younger generation.
Yes.
And they criticize them for their lack of information.
Yes. I've seen it. You see it in the black consciousness community, where brothers don't necessarily want to share what they know because what they know is their egotistical claim to fame. So if I normalize this information, I'm no longer special. And that's how you can tell who's really sincere about the freedom struggle and who's not. So if I look at my work, I give it all out. I'm going to teach you everything that I know so you can take this and teach it to the next generation. It's not about being special. It's about being effective. But we got to keep in mind, black men and black women come into the black consciousness community or the community grassroots struggle for personal reasons, not community reasons. Okay, people start churches not because they want to help people. Not most of the time. They do it because they want to help themselves. You see that. And when you are serving your ego and you're not serving the people, it will show. Because if you're serving the people, if someone better than you comes along, you will gladly include them. You may not pass the baton, but they have a seat at your table now because the people can benefit from this young man and this young woman if you're serving the people. But if you're serving your ego and you are in this primarily to be worshiped and celebrated and adored, anyone with a stronger skill set than you is automatically a threat and they become the enemy. And you've seen this through history. We've had black leaders who've been assassinated over ego and people feeling threatened over their right to be the face on a particular movement. Not only in America, you've seen this in Africa, you've seen it in the Caribbean islands, where the understudy or the next in line takes out the leader because they're tired of waiting and they want to be next. So, that ego of the black man is something that has to be studied. And I think that those of us who are in leadership positions, we have to guard against it within our own person. And then we also have to guard against it around the people who are around us. I know for me, the brothers who I work with, I'm always studying them to see whether or not they are here for the people or whether they are here because they want power and authority. You should only be here because you want what's best for black people. Abraham Lincoln, and I'm not a fan, he was a racist, but Abraham Lincoln said something that I do agree with. And he said, quote, "Anybody can withstand adversity." He said, that's not the true measure of a man. He said, the true measure of a man is whether or not they know how to effectively use power. He said, give a man power, and that's when you really see what his true character and integrity are.
Please explain the difference in the wording, empathy, and resources being distributed between the opioid epidemic versus the crack epidemic.
Mm-hmm. One of the greatest examples of racism and differential treatment of black people in this country in modern times can be seen in the contrast between the way in which the federal government and state and local government dealt with the crack epidemic as compared to the opioid crisis. Crack addicts were not treated as a mentally ill population. The crack epidemic was not treated as a public health crisis. The crack epidemic was treated as a crisis in criminality and a need for greater criminal justice oversight of the black community. More police, more arrests, more prisons, very little attention to treatment and rehabilitation. The crack crisis swelled up the prisons, not because black people were selling dope. It was more so because black people were using the dope. There's way more users than there are sellers. And because if you got caught in possession, the police arrested you based on possession. So you would go to jail based on the intent to use, to self-medicate, when you should have been going to a mental health hospital or a treatment center. That is what exploded the prisons during the crack epidemic, because they were incarcerating mentally ill addicts. We fast forward to this century, and you see an opioid crisis like nothing I've ever seen in my life. When I drive down through Frankfurt, and I think Frankfurt and Kensington may have the worst opioid strip in America, Zombieland. Open air use of dope with the police sitting there watching them. You would have never in your life seen a crack sale in front of a police officer, but you will see white people, poor white, buy, sell, and use opioids in open air in front of the police, and nothing is getting done. It's being treated as a public health crisis. It's being treated as a mental health emergency. It is being treated as a medical epidemic of grave proportions. These folks are getting treatment. They're getting set aside money. They're getting social work. They're getting free rehab. They're getting hospitalization. They are not going to jail. They are deliberately protecting white opioid addicts from incarceration, unlike what they did with blacks. Even look at marijuana. Marijuana is one of the greatest contradictions in modern time because you have 50 years of black men going to jail for possession and intent to distribute marijuana. Now you got white men making millions and billions of dollars off of the cannabis industry. Wait a minute. You destroyed 50 years of black families over weed. You destroyed 50 years of black families over weed. And now, with the stroke of a pen, it has become a multi-billion-dollar industry for the white man. Look at the hypocrisy there. And it's interesting because when we talk about reparations, anybody who was wrongfully incarcerated, and in my opinion, if you were incarcerated for anything that is now acceptable, you're wrongly incarcerated. Reparations is owed to all those black men and women who themselves and their families were destroyed as a result of wrongful incarceration. America wants to eliminate the African. And she's using every strategy at her disposal to do so. And when we look at drugs, chemical warfare was introduced into the black community by the CIA with crack in the 1980s to prevent another social reform movement like the Black Panther Party or the Civil Rights era. The reason you get crack in 80 is because they shut the door on the Panthers in the mid 70s. And they wanted to make sure the black community would never be able to rally again for its own liberation. And that's when they dropped off the chemical warfare. They actually gave us chemical and biological. They gave us AIDS and they gave us crack. We have never rebounded as a community since the AIDS epidemic and the crack epidemic.
And Dr. Umar, I want to hear you talk on this other thing of disruption. The time you get for violence crime versus drug offenses. I've noticed that violent offenders are released back into the community to be very disruptive. Do you think that's a strategy, or is that just something that takes place?
Well, I would argue white violent criminals are released back into the community. Black ones as well, but they do their time. Like I'm coming across black people who have done 5 and 10 years for petty theft. So for me, I think when it comes to black people, no matter what the crime is, they're going to make you serve it. But what I think is so unfair is the disproportionality between nonviolent drug-related offenses and everything else. I agree. A violent predator, sexual or otherwise, should definitely be getting more time than a nonviolent drug offender. But the greatest time served by black people has been served by nonviolent drug offenses. And that's because criminology is a function of intent by the government. In other words, you can be selling all the drugs you want over there. I'm selling a little bit of weed. But if the government says we targeting weed, then you can get away with what you're doing all day long. For example, the federal government has never targeted high-level white drug dealers. They have never targeted high-level white drug dealers. They may target high-level Mexican. They might target high-level Colombian. They've never targeted high-level white drug dealers because they know who brings the drugs in. They need drugs in America. Drugs are necessary for the American economy to operate because so many of your Fortune 500 companies smuggle drug money in order to support the worth of their stock. What is the only thing that not everybody, what is the one thing that for people who use it, they need it every day, they need it multiple times a day, they need it if it's raining, they need it if it's a blizzard, they need it if it's a hurricane, they need it if they're employed, if they're unemployed, they need it on the weekend, on the weekday. There's only one thing. Because remember, capitalism functions on supply and demand. There has to be a demand. What is the one thing that is always in demand, irrespective of war, health, COVID, crime? Crack, opioids, heroin, opium. Drugs are the only commodity on the planet Earth that you can sell at any time to a ready audience. You don't need a car every day. You don't need a laptop every day. You don't need a cell phone every day. The only thing you need all day, every day, including overnight, is drugs. And that's why America can never rid herself of dope, because the banking industry is dependent on it. They funnel the money. Insurance companies funnel it. Your 401k, the retirement pensions, all of them make use of smuggled drug money in order to support the worth of their stocks. Without the drug economy, the American economy would crash.
Do you think America's dependence on drug is a reflection of America being a sick society, as my Breaking Beers would say?
I would say, even if America were not a sick society, I think she would still be dependent on drugs, because I believe most modern governments are. China, Britain. I don't think you can find a government in the so-called first world that does not, in some degree, have some dependence, on the drug economy. It's too important. You need that money to operate your economy. Nothing else is guaranteed to sell as much as drugs is.
Oh, I wanted to rephrase the question in regards. When I said sick society, I meant to the mental health of the society of the citizens.
Yes. I believe that American society and Western culture in general is a very sick, narcissistic, and unhealthy reality. And I think that the technocracy and the illusion of democracy has convinced people that we're living in a civilization because we have technological sophistication and the right to vote. You cannot call a society civilized when people walk into the supermarket and inadvertently kill, walk into a school and shoot up 20, 30 kids at a time, go into a subway, detonate a bomb, kill the mother of their child, kill all their children, take their own life. That's not a healthy society. But because capitalism controls the collective consciousness of America, we believe that if you are able to buy, purchase, sell expensive things, that automatically means that you are a healthy people. America is like a rotten cake with the most expensive icing in the world put on it. And you don't know until after you've consumed too much of the cake, you understand me, that this thing was sick all along, but you were distracted by the appearance of things and not the reality of things. In my definition, America could not qualify as a civilization. It could qualify as a technocracy, a society ruled by computers and technology and technological advancements. Is not a civilization. For it to be a civilization, you must be about the perfection of the art of being civilized. When you look at the amount of black people who are murdered, killed, disenfranchised in this country, how can you call it a civilization? I just saw the other day how President Biden has made it legal for Ukrainian immigrants to get SSI checks. So if you are a Ukrainian refugee in America, you can apply for SSI. Help me understand that, because we have the highest black homelessness population since the 1960s. You got black people living on the street because they can't find a job and can't get any subsidy. But you're going to bring immigrants, didn't build this country, don't pay taxes, don't have a job, never paid into Social Security, but they're going to get Social Security benefits. You're taking from black people and giving to white immigrants. If that is not the greatest example of white privilege in this decade, I don't know what is. That's not a civilization. To neglect those who built the country and give their resources to white people from another land is one of the greatest examples of disproportionality, bias, racism, and discrimination I've ever seen. And at the same time, you're sending the Haitians back. Haitians got to get on a boat and go home, but the Ukrainians can come get free housing, free medical, free insurance, and an SSI check. But at the same time, white people tell black people, get off welfare. When are you going to tell the Ukrainians to get off of welfare? And the irony in sending the Haitians back, why is America the size she is? The Haitian Revolution bankrupted Napoleon's France. He had to sell for pennies on a dollar
That Louisiana Purchase.
the Louisiana Purchase, which tripled the size of the United States. America is the size she is because of the Haitian people, but you send them home, and Ukrainians who never did nothing for you, they get to get black people's reparation money.
What do you believe are the primary contributing factors to the disproportionate maternal mortality rates amongst black women? And what are the solutions?
Maternal mortality in black women, and I would also add infant mortality along with it, because sometimes the mother dies, sometimes the child dies, sometimes they both die. The question we got to ask, African people were on this planet by ourselves. The modern man, the modern African, the Homo sapien sapien, the most recent of all the human stages. We were on this planet alone by ourselves for at least 50,000 years before we left the continent and went anywhere else. At least 50. Some would say as much as 150,000 years. Some would say long. No matter what number you go with, whether it's 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 years, black women had no problem having babies in ancient times. In ancient times, the infant mortality rate was known to be small. How is it possible that the oldest human being in history, the black woman, been having babies for millennium, all of a sudden she gets to America and she can't have a baby without the baby dying or herself dying? I believe that this is intentional. I think it's poor prenatal care. I think it's also racism on the birthing table. I think a lot of it has to do with these chemicals that they give our women to deal with pain and ease during the birthing. I remember when my oldest daughter was born and they gave her mother epidural and they kept giving her epidural. I said, you might not want to take no more of that. That stuff is going to mess with the baby heartbeat. She took it anyway. The next thing you know, the doctor said, we have to do a cesarean section.
Tell your story, I'm going to tell Mike. Go ahead.
We have to do a cesarean section. There was no conversation about cesarean section until my daughter, who was born on May 6th, Martin Delaney's birthday, grandfather of Pan-Africanism, until her mother took the epidural. And if memory serves me correctly, because that was 21 years ago, but if memory serves me correctly, they gave her at least 2, maybe even 3 doses, and then they went into the cesarean section. I think they're doing it on purpose. Number one, they get more money for the cesarean section. Okay. Number 2, it gets them off the birthing table quicker because they take the baby out and then send her to surgery to get an inside sew back up. And of course, they don't want to see more black children being born in the first place. So that's the infant mortality. But if I can get rid of the black woman herself, the mother, I don't have to worry about her having any more children. What's more effective? Taking the child or taking the mother? Taking the mother because she's the nest. She's the birther. She can have more children. And not only are they doing this mortality, we also have to look at how a lot of black women postnatal, post-birth, are not able to get pregnant again because whatever they're doing inside of her when they deliver that child or post-cesarean section when they tie her back up. So when we're dealing with that whole process of pregnancy, through carrying it, through birth, there's a lot being done to the black woman that's contributing to her mortality and to the child's mortality. And I think that we could also indict the birth control pills, previous abortions. Some of these women were also taking the abortion shots. Some of them were also taking some of the abortion implants, these hormonal devices that they put inside of our women's body that messes with their hormones. I think all of this, including diet and the prenatal pills that they give them, I think all of this, as well as the chemicals they inject in them on the delivery table, I think all of this plays a role in the high mortality rate for expectant mothers, but also the high infant mortality rate for black children as well.
And it's a mixture of capitalism and racism. Because what I noticed is that, like, in my personal experience with my wife is that I spoke to a doula, right? And she was telling me a lot of times you can just change the position when the heart rate goes up with the child. So it doesn't have to be this big promotion. But what I noticed with my wife, she was there just chilling. And they just came in and rushed everything. No conversation. They try to overwhelm you with this fear. And there's no dialogue. There's no information. It's just we have to rush and do this. And as you said, what do they get paid more to do? So why wouldn't you do it?
Absolutely. And also, I believe my youngest daughter's mother gave birth to her at a birthing center. I know several doulas, women who help women give natural births, even in their home. I met a sister the other day who birthed her own child. I don't recommend that. But nonetheless, I think we need to look at more traditional modes of childbirthing. You know, I know sisters who go to Africa to birth their kids. They say, I'm having my child in Africa. My 9th month, I'm in Africa. I'm going to let the queen mothers in the village helped me give birth to my child. I think we need to go back to that. I would much recommend a home birth or a birthing center. You know, and the irony of it, the biggest difference between a traditional birth and a modern birth is with a modern birth, they put you on a table. You're laying vertically. Traditional birth, you stoop down, you see. Excuse me. Modern birth, you're laying horizontally. Traditional birth, it's vertical. You stoop and your hips loosen and they help pull the baby. In other words, gravity is to your benefit with the traditional African birth. These white folks are putting us on tables. So there's very little benefit of gravity. I mean, they tilt the table somewhat, but it's not the same type of effect if you're stooping down the way you go to the bathroom to relieve yourself. And I think black women need to recognize that the way in which you're having the child isn't conducive to the natural flow of childbirth in the first place.
Please explain the history of the IEP, Individual Education Program, and how it's supposed to work in theory versus how it works in reality.
Great question. So when we talk about IEP, Individual Education Plan, we're talking about the world of special education. Now, there's three things that automatically go together when we're dealing with IEP. It's a trinity. You can't have one without the others. They are the IEP, a learning disability classification, and special education. If you mention any one of those, the other two are automatically present. Special education is a program that gives the child an IEP because they have a learning disability. No learning disability, no IEP. If you have an IEP, you're in special ed. They all go together. I say that because sometimes you'll hear parents say, my child has an IEP, but he's not in special ed. If he has an IEP, he's in special ed on paper. The school's getting money for his education. He may not be assigned to a self-contained classroom. He may still be in a regular class, but he's still a special ed student. They're still getting paid for him. Okay. Now, special ed comes to us 1975. Public Law 94-142, Federal Government Education for All Handicapped Children Act. The federal government in 75 said, if a child has a disability, they have a right to two things: an education that is free and appropriate, and they must get that education in the least restrictive environment. Let's talk about least restrictive environment. What does that mean? Let's go back to 1954. U.S. Supreme Court outlaws segregation based on race in school. 20 years later, we get special ed. Special education is still segregated education. I want to be clear. Special education is a form of segregated education, but you're not segregating based on race. You're segregating based on disability. For his own good, we're going to take him from the regular class, put him in a special class because he's retarded. For her own good, we're going to take her from the regular class, put her in a special class because she's reading disabled. For their own good, we're going to take you from the regular class, put you in a special class because you're emotionally disturbed or autistic. You see how that works? So it's not race, it's disability. I would argue, based on my analysis, you won't find this written in any federal document, but based on my analysis, special education was the resegregation of black children. Look at the timeline. 54, Supreme Court says schools must desegregate, but they don't. In fact, since 54, the Supreme Court has issued at least 3 additional decisions demanding the schools to segregate, and they never segregated yet. Why? Because the Supreme Court is the judicial branch of government. They're not the executive. In other words, the Supreme Court can say whatever they want, but if the president doesn't execute it, if the Congress doesn't legislate on it, nothing happens. And that's why right now in 2022, our children are still segregated as much, if not more so, than they were in 54. So 64, Dr. King, Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act also contains educational amendments that speak to desegregation. The schools still don't segregate. 74, they're busing children, into the white school districts. You get Boston, Massachusetts, the most racist, divisive, anti-school desegregation movement in the North and probably in the whole country. So when the 70s hit and you got white people beating up black kids, bombing buses, threatening parents, the federal government said, wait a minute, we in Vietnam. We're trying to make the world safe for democracy. How do we look where we can't even guarantee black children a right to learn in a white class? That's when special ed came. Special ed was a compromise between the racist school districts and the feds. The feds said, listen, we know you don't like black kids. We don't like them either, but you're making us look bad. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a program where we're going to pay you to let them kids in. What you're going to do is you're going to let them in the school, make it look like we're desegregating. Once they get in the school, you can separate them all you want. As long as it looks like they're integrated, we're fine. So the school district said, well, what if we don't want them at all? Federal government said, if you don't take them, we're going to cut off any federal money you're getting. But if you take them, we're going to let you legally resegregate once you let them inside. But you're not going to do this based on race. We're going to give you some disabilities. We're going to give you a reading disability. We're going to give you a math disability. We're going to give you emotional disturbance. We're going to give you intellectual disability. Use these. Have the school psychologist evaluate and label them, and now you can separate them from white kids forever.
But and what I also notice is that when kids with IEP are in schools, they're just in general classes and they're not learning anything. And it seems like they're not receiving the resources they were promised to receive. Have you experienced that?
Not only have I experienced that, I see it every day. Here's the issue with special ed. If children did not receive a special ed subsidy, there would be no special ed. First of all, let's be clear. The only reason why New Jersey, Philly, Maryland, California, Texas, I don't care where you go. We can go down to the American islands. We can go down to St. Thomas and St. Croix. Same thing. The schools are putting black kids in special ed because they want that money. Let me give you an analogy. You a principal in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. 70% of your students qualify for free and reduced lunch. 60% come from single homes. None of them are reading on grade level. You know why they're not reading on grade level, because your teachers aren't teaching them. You know the feeder school didn't prepare them. So you have a decision. You're either going to tap into your Title I money and get those children the extra help that they need, or you're going to send them to the school psychologist. If you send them to the school psychologist, you're going to get a 100% increase in that child's funding. Special ed students are worth twice as much as the regular. So for example, let's take Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia school students probably get about, hypothetically, approximately $15,000 per student, right? Once they go in special ed, that child is worth almost 30 now. 30. It's a double your money. How many people you know, if they got a chance to double their money, are not going to double it? So sticking with you as the black principal, do you care about them kids? Because if you care about your students, you're going to make the teachers teach them. You're going to find the money in your budget to get them to after school tutoring. Mind you, you already get Title I money. You already getting Title I. Title I funds comes out of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, Lyndon Baines Johnson, War on Poverty, 1965. This money is earmarked for children in low-income schools to improve what? Reading and math. What are most black kids in special ed for? Reading and math. So if you're getting Title I money to address reading and math, why are all these children with reading and math problems ending up in special ed when you were already given money to help them? You know why? Poor oversight of Title I spending and greed. I know I got my Title I money, but I'm going to use that for something else. I want this extra special ed money. It's about greed, and it is about neglect of black children. And here's the big thing. Our parents, brother. This whole system of special ed to prison, the whole special ed to prison pipeline is held together by uneducated. When I say uneducated, I'm not talking about academically. uneducated about special education. So black parents don't understand that special ed is not a solution. I don't fault them for that, because the way they pitch it to you, they pitch it to you in a way that makes you feel like special ed is the best thing that ever happened to black children. He'll never get left back again. He'll get extra time. He'll get extra time on his tests. We're going to slow down the curriculum. We're going to give him his own learning plan, small group.
All right, I got to ask one question real quick, right? Is the I noticed I taught for 5 years in Philadelphia public school, right? And with the sped kids, do they have to pass them, or do they pass them so they don't have to show the paperwork for failing to give them service?
Great question. Are schools required to promote special education students? The issue is this. The IEP team determines what the child is going to learn while they're in special ed. So who technically decides if that child gets retained or promoted? The IEP team. Who's on the IEP team? 4 required people: the parent, the principal or designee, the regular ed teacher, and the special ed teacher. These 4 people meet every year to do a new IEP. The IEP must be done annually because you move up in grade annually, right? So when you meet, you decide as a team, he needs to repeat. That's not likely to happen in special ed for 3 reasons. Legally, can they be retained? Yes. A special ed child can be retained. Absolutely. I've retained them before, but it's not likely to happen. Why? 3 reasons. Number 1, what is the job of the IEP team? To monitor progress. To monitor progress. So if this kid has an IEP and he still can't read or hasn't made reading progress to the point where you have to consider retaining him,
You got to justify your job.
where was the progress monitoring? You got to justify your job. How, at the end of the year, are we talking about keeping them back when the whole purpose of the IEP is the pushing forward? That's number 1. Number 2, when the state and the feds come in to audit your books, if they see too many special ed kids being retained, it lets them know you're not really helping them. Number 3, the teacher who initially referred him for special ed, why did she want him tested in the first place? It wasn't for academics most of the time. It was for behavior. So you mean to tell me you're going to go right back to the same teacher who had him put in special ed and say, we're sorry, Mrs. Slovenberg, he's going to have to repeat 3rd grade. She's going to look at you like you crazy. The reason I put him in special ed is to get him out my class. And you're telling me I'm stuck with him for another year. That's why special ed kids are rarely retained. And I think it's a problem, brother, because we have special ed kids being socially promoted who don't know anything, who go to school in states with a graduation examination. If you live in a state that has a graduation exam and you've been socially promoted all through special ed, when you get to 12th grade, you got to take that test. You can barely read. You know what it does? It automatically perpetuates the school to prison pipeline because you're going to drop out because you can't pass. You don't get a diploma. What is life going to be for that special ed kid who was socially promoted from first grade when he first got his IEP till 12th grade when he failed the graduation test? He don't have a diploma. He's on the street. Drugs, guns, the military not even going to take him if he can't get a GED. And a lot of these brothers we see on the corner selling dope, they were the special ed children who were not academically prepared for life, and they ended up on the street because they had nowhere else to go after they failed the graduation test.
And you made a great point. And one more thing I want to add, that they're spiritually demoralized. They don't feel they can accomplish anything. Because don't get it twisted. The kids sit there and know they haven't done anything in the past.
Yes, sir.
Year after year.
Yes, sir. And they know that they're allowed to exist in an atmosphere of mediocrity. They know they don't have to perform. They know that they don't have to achieve. And the biggest side effect of special ed, and this is why I always tell parents, I tell teachers, never tell your child that they have this disability. Before you tell him he has ADHD, before you tell him he's reading disabled, before you tell her she's intellectually disabled, she thinks she can make it. Do you feel me? They do not see no difference between themselves and the next student. But the minute you tell them you reading disabled, you emotionally disturbed, you just created a glass ceiling. It's a self-perpetuating prophecy that the child is now going to live up to. I was told I got a reading disability. I don't have to try. I don't have to study. I don't have to do homework. And so for me, the number one side effect of putting kids in special ed who don't need it is the low self-esteem, the low self-worth that it engenders in the child. And let us be clear, special ed kids have one of the highest dropout rates. Well, what do you expect? Nobody believes in me, not the teacher. And then once the other students in the school find out that that's the special ed class, it's over because they're going to pick on me forever to the point where I don't even want to show up to school because everybody know I'm special. The whole system is trifling, but the feds are not going to touch it because they know that's the only thing keeping some of these white schools. Okay. It's the only thing that has some of these white schools still allowing black kids to come. If they stop giving those white private schools, excuse me, not white private, because private schools don't get special ed money. If they stop giving these white public schools and white charter schools the prerogative to special educate and financially exploit these kids, there would be no desegregated schools in America. The special ed dollar is what's keeping these schools desegregated.
What is this big obsession with like this big push of Trump support from black people? Like, what's going on here, fight?
Couple things. I think the reason why Donald Trump is getting more support from black people, and I would not be surprised if this would be the first election since the 1930s that black people voted more for a Republican than a Democrat. So history might be made in November. History might be made. But don't get it twisted. The black bourgeoisie is on their job and they out there. You see Kamala Harris running around with Fat Joe, I think it was, and some other rappers. They trying to get the rappers to carry the vote for Trump now. So the black bourgeoisie ain't gonna go easy because they know if Trump wins, they're done. No more contracts, no more set aside. You see what I'm saying? Because remember, the black bourgeoisie is only fighting for their own personal stake. They don't care about black folks. And the Democrats, if you can't deliver the black vote, what good are you? So they all going if they lose. They're not fighting for us, they fighting for themselves. Couple reasons why black folks may go Democrat Republican in November. Black people may go Republican in November. Number one, I think they're finally getting disenchanted with the Democrats. I think it's finally beginning to seep in. I think a lot of the analyses that are being made by black political thinkers, including myself, I think black people are really starting to see that we've been had. I mean, to have voted this way for 90 years and got nothing out of it, it's time for a change of some sort. That's number one. Number two, I think a lot of black people are attracted to Donald Trump's unapologetic disposition. He's very unapologetic. He don't go off cue cards. Completely different from Barack Obama and Joe Biden. You follow me? For a lot of black people, even though he's a racist, he's a breath of fresh air because he says what he wants to say. The entertainment aspect of Donald Trump is winning blacks. Number three, Donald Trump claims to care about the economic state of black America, which he doesn't. But he's openly saying, I'm going to do something about the economics in the black community. He said that the first term and ain't do nothing, right? So he's not going to do nothing, but he's speaking directly to black America where Joe Biden is not. And I think that's why he's going to carry a lot of votes, especially black men. Especially black men, because what is the black man's biggest issue? Earning money. Biden ain't even talking about it. So I do think that Donald Trump, for the first time in almost 100 years, he may carry the black vote. Now, I'm still not voting for neither one of them. And the reason why is they're both racist. Neither one has a track record of helping black folks. Joe Biden got this migrant crisis coming in where he's basically trying to wash out the black with the brown, and they are making headway. To see him take care of people who are not even citizens, while we got homeless blacks, disabled blacks out there, veterans who not getting what they're supposed to, I can't support that crap. To watch him take care of the Native Americans and the homosexuals and the Asian hate bill and all this, and billions to Ukraine and billions to Israel, and not do nothing for me, he can't get my vote. But when I look at Trump, I look at the fact that he signed more death warrants, federal death warrants, his last term than any president since slavery. And when I look at the fact that he wants to give the police complete immunity, they're killing us now. Once they get complete immunity, you can't even question what they did. You know how many black folks are going to die on these streets? So for me, I have very strong, compelling reasons to not vote for either, and I don't have a good reason to vote for either. So neither one of them getting my vote. I'll probably vote for one of my ancestors or something.
uh, the thing I don't understand with the politics, man, is like we understand the game, right? But the promises they make, you don't have to have the greatest intellectual capability to understand they can't deliver,
Or will
right?
not deliver.
Or will
Yeah.
not deliver,
Yes,
right?
sir.
So that's the whole point I don't understand with this commitment, because I don't understand how people argue, specifically black people. I don't know how they understand. I don't understand how they argue about politics in this modern day of time, as if like this person's actually going to help you and this other person's actually going to help you. And like, if we observe what's going on, even what you said with immigration, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to be Dr. Doom, but fire look kind of rough for black people moving forward, how the system's set. And I don't see these people doing anything to assist. So we may want to come up with another plan outside of walking behind these people and looking for them to do something.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing: the immigrants are here for three main reasons. Number one, to replace us at the polls, even though they're not citizens in many jurisdictions due to election fraud. If you have a work permit, you can damn sure get a voting permit. You follow me? So one of the reasons Joe Biden brought them in here is to aid them at the polls. So they're here to replace us at the polls. They're here to replace us in the labor market. They're going to take all of the low industry jobs, your Walmart, your McDonald's, your grass cutters, your floor sweepers. They're going to take all that, so it won't be none left for blacks.
They started taking them already. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the third reason, and I hate to say it because I don't want to see this, but this is America. I believe that at some point in the future, I don't know how soon, I don't know how distant, America is going to instigate a racial clash between brown people and black people. If you look at Chicago, the brothers and sisters are already talking about it in Chicago. They say the way where they put these migrants at in our community, they were telling me how some of the Latino gangs are recruiting them, arming them. They're hurting black people. They beat up one black girl really bad, messed the whole eye up. Nobody went to prison. They said if you look at the writing on the wall, they are arming themselves to one day rise up against us. There was something, this white woman did a report on YouTube where she said a whole bus full of migrants came to Chicago, and somebody from the army brought bags full of weapons on there. She said she saw herself. If this doesn't go as quickly as they want it to go in terms of us being replaced by them, they're going to instigate a racial class that will lead to a mass loss of life for black folks, because the government is going to stand with them against us. We're going to be seen as the perpetrators. So black people need to get armed. We need to get ready. But we also need to admit that part of this is our fault, though, because we have pushed this multiculturalism. We have preached this black and brown thing so long that, well, since they're always talking about black and brown, send the brown people in there. And that's exactly what they did, because we don't believe in having communities of our own. But with that being said, the biggest reason why black people don't get anything for our vote and never will is our vote is disorganized. In order to hold you the new mayor of Camden, hypothetically, he's the new governor of New Jersey, hypothetically, I can't hold either one of you accountable if we did not vote as a group. I have to be able to tell you that 45% of the black vote went to you, and we did this together. So if you don't open up them swimming pools, if you don't come up with some jobs, your next election, you're gone. Whether we get that 45% vote to another Democrat, another independent, or the Republican, you will not be in office the next time around. But when you vote as individuals, there's no organizational structure to your vote. You can't make them kind of threats because you voted by yourself. And you alone can't unseat me. You alone can't unseat me. You alone can't unseat me. Don't you find it interesting that people only tell black people to vote? They never tell them to organize it. Jews organize their vote. Those immigrants who are voting, it's going to be organized. The Arabs, they organize. I'm not saying they all vote for the same candidate, but they vote in blocks that are large enough where the person running for office better heed whatever it is they need to get done, because if you lose that block of votes, you might not carry that election. We don't do that. We ain't got no black voting blocks. Show me somebody that got a black voting block. We are completely dependent on the Democratic Party plantation to carry out anything black people need done. We don't vote as independent voters. We don't think as independent voters. It's all Democrat until it's not.
In 2022, 69% of the people who died by suicide were white males. Please explain why white male suicides are skyrocketing and no one is talking about it.
Great question. I learned while studying psychology in graduate school that white men have consistently had the highest rate of suicide in this country. Middle-aged, rich white men lead the country in suicide. Elderly black women are the lowest risk for suicide. I would argue because of their spiritual foundation. Black people are a spiritual people. Black women are the epitome of spirituality because she's the first human being that God created to send light through. So I believe it is our spirituality, despite slavery, despite Reconstruction, despite Willie Lynch, despite Jim Crow, despite civil rights, despite black power, despite the crack, despite the Obama neglect, despite the Joe Biden hypocrisy, our faith as a people has insulated us from the thought of taking one's life as a result of not being able to cope with one's emotional pain. No disrespect to the European community. They can be religious too, but they do not have the spiritual strength or foundation of the original man and the original woman. I think Europeans are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to establishing a relationship with supreme consciousness because, number one, their culture is not rooted in connection with God. They come from a very objective, a very Eurocentric scientific approach to reality that says if I can't see it, if I can't measure it, if I can't manipulate it, if I can't control it, it must not exist. So if we look at white psychology doesn't even admit the existence of spirit. Sigmund Freud, although the father of European psychology, he came the closest to establishing the belief that there is a spirit that dwells within the man, but he was rejected when the behavioral revolution came, and they said that he was basically a heretic for dealing in concepts that had no scientific basis. So white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit. So here's the question. If a white man is suicidal and white psychology doesn't admit the existence of spirit, when he goes for treatment to deal with his suicide, and if there is in fact a soul within us, how is he ever going to overcome the emotional pain that he's suffering from if the therapist working with him won't even admit that there's something greater that is motivating his life from within him? With black people, when we go to therapy, we tell the therapist we have a spirit. It ain't a question to be debated. We have a spirit. So therapy is about reconnecting you to that essence. White psychology don't even admit it exists. So if you're a white person suffering trauma and you haven't grew up in a home or a community with a strong religious or spiritual basis, what intervention can be had for that type of person to stop them from committing the ultimate mistake? I believe it is the materialistic nature of European society, the anti-spiritual nature of European society, the narcissistic nature of European society that measures success by material growth, that has all these white men and girls judging their life success based on what they earn and what they own. That is a recipe for death and destruction. And we also see a similar parallel with Chinese college-age students who, if they don't get accepted into Harvard, into Yale, into Princeton, into some of these elite universities, they take their life because they feel that they failed the family. Because after all, my mother and father sacrificed their entire life to put me in this position, and I didn't score high enough on the test. So whether we're dealing with, now the Asians do have a pretty strong spiritual foundation, but in the modern world, in their pursuit to conquer the European, I think they have become just as materialistic as the European. And as a result, their mental health has declined just as much so. Even if you look recently, a couple of these recent mass shootings have been Asians. You understand? And to that point, the white man and the yellow man are forming a coalition, at least on this soil, to combat the black man. 89% of the interracial marriages that have taken place in the past decade have been white to Asian. The Asians are the group that the white power structure has adopted as probationary whites to increase their numbers and push back against black people.
I'm glad you spoke about materialism because my follow-up question to that was is that I believe white men struggle because the subsidies their forefathers received, specifically the GI Bill, and even an increase in homes, and even nepotism to a certain extent, because I think nepotism has declined tremendously in America because everything is short term, everything is moving around so much. You're not going to be at a job for 30 years. I think because of those factors, they're not living up to the standard in their family and they can't deal with it.
Mm, that's a great point. Three things come to mind with your comment. Number one, is there an ancestral curse against Europeans in America? You follow? When I look at that type of suicide, when I look at the type of mental illness that I see against European people in general, when I look at the medical issues, don't get me wrong, we have them too, but many of our medical issues are induced by the society in which we live due to poor food and poor medical care. They don't have to worry about that, but yet they're suffering. Look at the decline in their numbers. I mean, white people have been going out of their way as a government to reduce the numbers of black people in this country at least since the 1970s. AIDS, poor nutrition, black on black crime, police genocide.
Stress.
Exactly. But yet, half of the states have a zero white birth growth rate. More white people are dying and being born in 25 states while you're going out of your way to get rid of blacks. I think there might be an ancestral curse due to slavery. But black people can't get comfortable with that. See, I'm very careful when I bring up things of a spiritual nature because as a race of people, we're always looking for an excuse to not do nothing. And that's one of my issues with the black church. The black church gives us some very clever excuses to sit around and not do nothing. We have to be agents of change. We can't sit around waiting for spiritual and cosmological intervention because no people who ever got free because the angels came and fought for them. You see, so black people have to make sure we live in this reality. Although we may be inspired by what goes on the spiritual side of reality, we can make our decisions based on that. We have to make our decisions based on the real world in which we live. And any intervention we're going to get from the ancestors or from God or from the spirits, let it come when it comes. But you can't make your decisions based on that.